Hello and welcome to Brain Trust Live number 511.
This week on the podcast, the April 5th protests, a great place to be mad about literally anything.
And we famously love a filibuster stunt, but save your money. Cory Booker's presidential campaign will be funded by the good billionaires, not your $5.
Plus, do you ever wonder if there's a reason you don't understand what's going on with these tariffs? Do you wish somebody credible would explain them to you? Us too.
We'll have all this and more.
This is Brain Trust Live.
Hey y'all, I'm Brent.
I'm Lila, and you can find us on the web at www.braintrustlive.com. Week 2. We're back.
I know.
We'll see how long we can keep this up.
They said we couldn't do it.
That's right. They being maybe us. Nobody really knows who they were, but
yeah.
They were not optimistic people.
No.
We come to you also fresh from political action.
Yes.
Of a sort.
Yeah, we went to a protest.
Yeah. I mean, we went to the protest.
We went to the protest.
The protest that everyone went to.
Yeah.
That was the one. We went to it.
Yeah.
It was a few interesting things happened in LA, though. One is they held it at 4 p.m. Brilliant.
That's what you do.
Hold all protests at 4 p.m. in LA from now on. First of all, I have no idea if this worked, but it at least allows you to coincide with the East Coast primetime news cycle.
Sure.
On the other hand, and more importantly, it allows everyone in LA to brunch first.
That's exactly
And I
right.
should point out to all of you, protesting in LA is like a logistical nightmare.
Right.
You got to get yourself downtown.
Right.
You need to be fortified. It's very dry and hot here a lot of the time.
Uh-huh.
You want to be hydrated prior to getting downtown.
Oh, yeah.
You don't,
Oh, that first glass of water we had
Oh, my
after
God.
that protest, and we didn't even do the whole thing.
No.
I mean, just kidding. We did the whole thing.
No, but here's what we did that I think was also smart on our part.
Sure.
We skipped the pre-speeches. We got there in time to start marching.
And we skipped the post.
And we skipped the post. We skipped all the speeches. Because
We did the marching, which is the important part, I think.
I didn't want to hear any politician tell me that they were working for me.
I saw a picture of Nancy Pelosi speaking at one the other day, and I was like, no.
Don't sign me up for that.
I'm not. So I don't even know who spoke at the one when they...
Don't care. Don't want to find out.
Right. It started at Pershing Square and then went to City Hall, and they had a whole setup for speakers. Don't know who it was. Don't want to know, to your point. Glad I didn't hear him.
That's right. Don't want to know what they said.
It would have been a laundry list of people that in that moment where I was generally feeling good about things, was not trying to hear from.
Yeah, people.
And that would have been a list of essentially all living politicians.
That's right. Any person that would have deigned to show up at this protest is also a person I don't currently respect. And I realize I showed up at the protest. I mean, in the political class. I mean, of the speaker class.
Yeah.
Anyone who claimed they were fighting for us at that protest,
right.
I want to see receipts before you're invited to the next protest.
Yes.
Like, I don't want to hear that you're fighting for us in a vague sense and that you agree with us that, you're not happy with how things are going. Like, no one needs that from a politician right now.
No.
If you are not if you're not at the protest to deliver a laundry list of actions that you recently took to protect us, then I'm not interested in hearing you talk.
Right.
I don't need more motivation. You need more motivation.
Yeah.
So I'm very pleased with our choice not to hear the speeches. I was interested on, just based on my perusal of social media after, the other people that we know that attended are not the usual suspects.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting protest day, I think, because I think a lot of people who have been sort of taking a backseat in Democratic politics have recently realized that backseat resulted in potentially the end of democracy and are now kind of like, what do we do? And it's like, they're now taking a lot of the actions that those of us that were like, before were like, we could, and this could all end if we don't take actions we're already taking. And so I was interested to see that a lot of people that I didn't expect attended that protest.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of is like the one, because, I was annoyed about it. The day before, I said I didn't want to go.
Right.
You and I had talked about it, and I was like, I'm not going to that stupid thing.
Yeah, we've been feeling very down on...
Yeah, we've been feeling very down, and
everything.
I also sort of like, the sort of what I would have maybe previously contended, the sort of like, performative resistance sort of always gives me personally like, a little bit of an eye roll, and that's me. I get it. Like, people are just out doing their best. But, there were also sort of like, I think I texted you even the morning of, where I was annoyed because they released their official graphic because it was called the Hands Off protest, which I don't really know that I get. Also, back to our talking about last week's messaging, I think that was weird.
Yeah.
But also, it was just like a list of things that like we want Trump and Elon Musk to have our hands off of, and one of them was NATO.
Right. It was like,
and I was like,
a lot of people showing up to protest them having their hands on NATO.
Sort of like, so I still feel I was just sort of like, even as I was getting there, I was like, understood why it was probably important that there be a lot of people there, but then also sort of being like, I don't know that I personally want to be there. But then I feel like there were some things that sort of like did, yes, in finding out who was there after the fact, but then also, I mean, one of the first things I said, I think when we got there was like, well, this feels very much like the entire breadth of a potential coalition. You know what I mean? And like,
totally.
And I don't know what their end game will be. It'll probably be to elect some normie, terrible person like Cory Booker, who we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So like, I don't necessarily trust everybody there.
Of course not.
But like, in the sense that like, there was somebody with a sign that said, "Hands off the Constitution," marching a foot away from a person with a sign that said, "Capitalism is murder."
Right.
Like, that felt...
It felt good.
Like something.
That everyone could be there together.
I was like, okay, well, maybe this is the beginning of a thing.
Well, and I think my main criticism of that kind of messaging prior to attending would be the same criticism I've had of all messaging coming out of the left and center of any sort of late, which is that it's all reactive. Because I want to go to a protest that's for something, not against something.
Yes.
And I also don't want all of the oppositional messaging to just be, don't do anything different than what we've been doing.
Right.
Because everything should be different than how it's been.
I was going to say, more on that later also.
But I did feel like the attendees had a variety of ideas, some of which weren't real ideas, some of which were. Some of which were things that I approved of, others of which I thought were naive and dumb. Yeah. Everyone was there, and that was nice. It's nice. The thing I always like about marching is that then you're like there with everyone. So you feel like at least we're all here.
Right.
Like you get to visually be like, I'm not in a vacuum of people who don't care about anything. Because in LA it can often feel like you
surely can.
And I'm also pleased that the protests were so big in some random cities.
Yeah, I liked... I think it was the group 5051, and they were working with Indivisible and various other groups, many of whom probably annoy me for whatever reason that I can't think of right now. But like, I did appreciate that it was like, this is what I have had issue with, I think, about a lot of these sort of like what feel like pop-up rallies. Again, not to say that those aren't important in their own way also, but like, it really felt like, there were huge it was on the same day. Yeah. It was entirely across the country. It was no way, unless you were the New York Times, it was probably front page news. Right. To at least you on your social media feed, probably.
CNN actually covered it.
It was inescapable, right? And it was in places. Like, there were huge, I'm from Iowa, and so, like, I was seeing all of those. But, like, a huge one in Des Moines, a huge one in Iowa City. Yeah. Which is pretty lefty. But even still, it's just, like, nice to have something organized to be like, oh, I'm partaking in something that, like, feels like it's happening everywhere. A huge one in Salt Lake City.
Well, that's what was nice about the Women's March when it happened, is that it was huge everywhere. And that I think was, I am not someone who thinks that was an ineffective thing just because it ended up, ultimately falling apart and collapsing into infighting like everything does. Because I think just having that scale of people show up on the same day to do something did have an effect on how the Trump administration was able to operate after that. And it also had an effect on on how Democrats were able to sort of rally each other. Do I think they did it wildly effectively, or that they used that in a perfect way? Of course not. No. I have a lot of criticisms about how that all happened, but I do think there's like a role for mass protest. I just think the thing that is very hard about doing a mass protest in the U.S., because you hear other countries sort of complain about this a lot, where activists will be like, well, we got 3 million people to come to Paris. I don't know what's wrong with you guys. And it's like, well, we can't all get to the same place easily. That's getting to the LA protest took as long as most of the people who would have to get to Paris to the 3 million person Paris protest just for us. And we live in LA.
Right. And it was nice because there was also another gigantic one that I saw photos of the other day, was the one in San Diego.
Exactly.
Right. So like it's like the San Diego, they didn't have to drive here. They could just have their own, and it was also huge.
Exactly. And it was nice that if Salt Lake City can have a giant protest, that's impactful here just from a sort of electoral politics frame. When people start seeing these things happen in their districts, that is different than seeing a big protest in New York where it's like, of course a lot of New Yorkers are mad at Donald Trump. Like what?
Yeah, right.
They started mad at him.
Right.
Probably you could get all 8 million people in New York.
Been mad at him since the 80s.
Exactly.
Right.
So that isn't the same kind of news story for an American news audience as it is to have a huge one in Boston. Where, of course, they're not Donald Trump fans in Boston, but you don't normally hear the news about a protest in Boston. Yeah. Boston's protest was all over the news.
Yeah.
So that's meaningful, and I think an important difference between how coverage has to happen for U.S. mass movement days and how it happens in a lot of smaller countries. I think oftentimes that's not well understood, and because of that, people don't leverage it correctly.
Sure.
Because I actually think it's more important that they report on like Asheville, North Carolina's massive protest than the LA one. And I don't, part of the reason I feel so kind of ambivalent about the LA protest is I'm like, well, we go and we march through an empty downtown. We're not as big as New York and we're not as big as DC. And so no one reports on it. And then we just sat in the sun for no reason listening to boring speeches after marching only 5 blocks.
We did. It wasn't entirely empty though, because one of the streets we went down had cars on it. You remember this?
Oh my God.
And there were multiple Teslas on it.
That was fun. Some of them started holding signs just to protect themselves from the crowd.
Yeah, I think that they were concerned.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was, I think, a wrong turn. Because remember, then we kind of like looped
protest
around.
took a wrong turn.
The protest itself like went down.
Well, what happened in a lot of cities is I think, because I heard about this in New York as well, they didn't expect it to be as big as it was in most cities. And so there was not enough, I don't mean enough in the real way, but their law enforcement did not kind of like properly allocate resources to some of the things that they normally would, such as directing traffic for these kinds of marches. And I think they were the volunteers were overrun.
Right. And because they didn't have enough police officers in New York, I'm assuming that it devolved into looting and chaos and violence.
As it always does.
Right? Is that what happened in New York?
Not one incident reported on of any sort.
It
turns out that not having the police there actually was an irrelevant and if not beneficial thing.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's fun.
Huh.
Well, think
Shocking.
about also, I mean, the attendees at these protests looked like Indivisible's mailing list. It was like old ladies, mothers with 6-year-old children,
Sure.
like a couple angry guys, and like some 20-somethings who hadn't been shamed by their 20-something friends yet into not attending anything and being too cool for school.
Yeah.
It was not like Antifa, the imaginary Antifa that people have in their minds.
Right.
Like rioting in the streets.
Yeah,
it was like a bunch of old ladies marching.
Yeah, there's no Molotov cocktails.
Not one Molotov cocktail that I saw. And
Next time.
That's right. We gotta get on that. But I mean, so it was like a very like user-friendly protest crowd, which it was intended to be. A mass protest like that is always supposed to be.
Yeah, I know. I feel like there's always like the people who are sort of like on the far fringy left who sort of like don't want to be at something like that.
Yeah,
but it's like,
that's fair.
Do you want like 7 people to be your march?
I was gonna say, I want to be at everything.
It's like part of having a march is the optics of the march.
Right.
So
you got to try different tactics. That's. Right. I think a lot of people on the left in times like this maybe will lower their standards for how puritanical they want to be about what kinds of actions they're involved in.
Well, and that's how I finally ultimately got myself there, because my initial instinct was to do that.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, it's like there needs to be some show of something.
Right.
Even if nobody there knows exactly what that show is of.
Well, and it's why it's why I feel so strongly that like the Occupy model was actually the real model we should all embrace, not because I love disorganized chaos, though I do, obviously, but because that was like a protest model that gave you the opportunity to try a lot of different things within the framework of one movement.
Sure.
And to do whatever you like to do within that framework. So, and I think part of that, though, was having big marches. Some of it was camping in a park.
Right.
Some of it was just putting free libraries around and being like, this is an Occupy library. Like, there were a lot of different things you could do inside of that movement. But I feel like sometimes people on the far left get a little too pure about how they want to engage. And it's fine to get pure about how you personally want to engage, because, like, put your resources wherever you want.
Sure.
But you can't be pure about how other people engage in a world where not everyone is going to be flinging Molotov cocktails.
Right, exactly. Yes.
So, I mean, I'm glad we went. I'm also glad we didn't listen to any of the speeches. I don't think we were the audience for them.
We were
and
not.
You can't be the audience for everything.
No, you can't.
And that actually brings us seamlessly to our next talking point, which is, it might have seemed like we were definitely the audience for that Cory Booker filibuster, because we love a filibuster on this podcast. Historically, if you're a longtime listener, you know that we will geek out about any kind of filibuster, even a right-wing filibuster I love to follow.
Sure.
This filibuster, though, listen.
Well, it wasn't one.
It wasn't one, is an important first note.
It was a speech. It was a long speech.
It was a long speech that Cory Booker gave. He just held the floor for a long time.
Yeah.
He did break the record for holding the floor for the longest time, finally unseating Strom Thurmond after all these years. Here's what I have 2 thoughts about it that I want to say.
Sure.
And then Brent can give up to 2 thoughts. You can give as many thoughts as you want. My first thought is, as we said last week, and as I continue to believe, I'm pro all theater. Do any theater
Yeah, we literally, I mean.
I do all the theater that you want. Do silly theater, do important theater. Just trying anything was a new step for Democrats, and I support that. I don't like that this was so obviously just a fundraising grab that had no actual purpose, and I'll tell you why I know it had no purpose. Because they had the opportunity to hold up real nominations earlier in this cycle, in this administration,
right.
And instead he chose to deliver that speech holding up nothing.
Held up nothing.
Hold up, if you're going to deliver a speech
right.
for 25 hours in the midst of a crisis, hold up some fucking legislation.
That's exactly right.
I also fault, because it was for no purpose, I understand why no one joined him in this, but once you're holding up legislation, you can get other people to come on and hold the line with you. Yep. You can get other people to continue the filibuster.
Yeah.
Hold up legislation in the Senate for like 6 days.
Yeah. People were suggesting that on Twitter.
Yes.
There's 47 of you.
Yes. We could get over a month of holdups. I don't trust that all of them could do 24 hours. I get that they're all 100 years old, but a full month of holdups could have been done.
Yeah.
If we had cycled through effectively enough.
Yeah.
And that is the kind of stunt that I think, because it would have meaningfully held up the business of the Senate, would have been impactful legislatively.
Yeah.
The idea of doing a stunt that is actually for no purpose was just like a perfect sort of optic mistake for Democrats.
Well, and it was like the encapsulation of sort of
everything.
Like,
it's empty words for 26 hours, and then
go on,
give me $5.
Cory, give me nothing.
Exactly.
And then ask me to give you something.
Right. Because I hope that not one single listener of this podcast or anything that we recorded in the past or future gave that man $5 after this.
Oh my God.
I know some of you did. I'm not gonna listen. You got caught up in a moment, and that's fine. Sure. I'm going to need you all to do better next time. Don't give these fools a dime until they actually produce something.
That's exactly right. I saw a sign yesterday that said, "What Cory said." I'm like, no, we're not doing that. I wanted to go back
26
to that person,
hours of blathering for no purpose. What Cory said. That's the Democrats in a nutshell.
Right. Yeah. And in fact, I think the first thing, like literally the first bit of legislation that came up after that speech,
he voted with Republicans on funding.
To keep sending
bombs to Gaza.
Right, exactly. And I think that in that 25 hours, I want to say that the committee he's on unanimously voted to send another nominee for a full vote.
Yeah,
to
that
the
feels right. That feels right.
And he just wasn't at it.
No.
But he would have voted. He would have voted unanimously with the rest of his.
As everyone in the Senate is happy to do. Don't right. Keep in your mind that two things can be true, that a theatrical moment can be good and important and everyone should be doing them. And also it has to be backed up by actual work.
Yeah.
You can't just do theater and still get our $5.
That's right.
You can just do theater and get us saying, good, I'm glad you did theater.
Yeah.
That you can get our congratulations for doing theater, but you cannot get our $5 for doing theater.
No.
These people they have not done any work for you yet.
No.
And so don't believe that
there was
happened.
that bit at the very end where Schumer interrupts him and was like, "Can I interrupt you?"
They're such hams.
And Cory Booker's like, "Well, this is the only time in my entire career that I'm ever going to be able to say no to you, Chuck Schumer. But like, I've got the floor." And like that was when Schumer was like, informed him that he just broke the record. But like, I saw that clip where everybody was like, thought it was a cute moment, and I was like, that is not a cute moment because you need to be saying no to Chuck Schumer at least once a day.
I feel like we are in a crisis. You can say no to the boss now.
Yes.
Like to keep your own job. And should be.
And you would be, if your plan is to just be already starting your presidential campaign, which I think a lot of people are, like one of the best things that you could do besides do a 26-hour speech is go in public and tell everybody what a shitbag Chuck Schumer is.
I have been saying this to everyone at every level of government when I make my calls to everyone in government.
Oh yeah, you've been telling Laura Friedman.
I've been telling Laura Friedman this, which is a different version of the same advice, which is Laura Friedman is a freshman congresswoman, and listen, I'm sorry you got stuck in this shitty situation where the first government you get to be a part of is ending and there's no one knows what to do and you're part of a party of do-nothings who are like actually the biggest losers on earth. And like, that sucks. And I know you didn't sign up to be a martyr and I know you didn't sign up to be a hero. Sadly, we're in a moment where you got to pick one.
Right.
And the best way to protect your job right now would be to look like you're doing any work. Currently, the work you're doing is the kind of fake work that no one cares about, where it's like they were at Ciclavia, like with a booth that told you how to talk to debt collectors or like that kind of stuff. Like, I don't give a shit about that stuff right now.
These freshman Congress people, I think, always like want to get there, and they want to be like, I'm going to put my nose to the grindstone.
That's right.
And it's like, I get that.
Sure.
I get the notion that you
Of
want
course.
to do that. But
constituent services are so important.
But what people are looking for you to do right now
offer any
is
leadership at all.
Not that. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
They're looking for you to do constituent services
Right.
to the extent that the government still exists.
Right.
But you have to be able to do both. And one of the things you have to be able to do is make an argument for why you should represent us in government. Like, you represent us. Hakeem Jeffries doesn't represent us.
No.
He represents a district in Brooklyn that we don't live
Right.
in. So I feel like the best thing that a freshman congressperson could do right now is get in there and say no to that man.
I was going to say, light it on fire.
Light everything on fire. Go rogue. I've been trying to convince, and then on the other hand, I've been trying to convince, people at a much more senior congressman's office that is also the road for them because they have the leverage to do it. Everyone should be coming up with the reason to go rogue right now.
Right.
Because the way that Donald Trump is getting us right now is that he is like lighting 1,000 things on fire, and then we're just running around trying to put out these fires. We should go light 1,000 things on fire.
Right.
Like, chaos him back.
Yeah.
Like, it's not beneficial to be unified right now because you guys don't have a majority, and all you can do as a unified party is tell us you don't have any power. And that's embarrassing for everyone.
I know.
So,
yeah, totally.
Anyway, do you have 2 to 3 thoughts about Cory Booker and or Infinity Thoughts?
I think maybe I've shared them.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I just, like, I don't... It's just nothing.
It's nothing. I mean, it turned out to be nothing. It's fun to have anyone try anything.
Exactly. So, like... here's another thought. Don't believe him when he tells you that he didn't experience any bodily functions in that 25 hours.
Oh, I know. I'm so mad about this.
Like, I get it. Like, he's going to be asked about it, and, like, the answer can't be, well, I shit myself 4 times in that 25-hour period. Like, because that's gross. That's not the message that you want to be sending coming off of the Senate floor at that time.
Right.
But the cockamamie answer about how he just, like, hadn't eaten and had fasted and dehydrated himself for the last... We're not doing that. Like...
No. Tell us your secrets.
tell us, or don't. But I mean, it's just like,
Don't lie to us.
saw so many people share it and being like, oh, well, that's how he did it. It's like, he didn't do anything.
No, of course not.
He was, like, your body just didn't shut down for those 25 hours, despite that you hadn't had water the day before.
Yeah.
That's not how bodies work.
It's not how bodies work. He would have been experiencing a dry mouth situation similar to Marco Rubio that time if he had really dehydrated himself to that extent.
Anyway.
But keep your eye out for stunts that aren't backed up by action.
Yeah.
And make sure that your praise is limited to the stunt if that's what you're going to do.
Yes, exactly.
But I want to be seeing more stunts. I'm not here to say don't do stunts.
Sure. And they're gonna... you have to start doing the stunts to learn how to do the stunts.
That's right.
Yeah,
these people have not been trying anything.
I was gonna say, so they're starting from zero here.
That's right. Yeah, so this was an experimental run.
That's right.
Because none of them have ever attempted to take a stand in any fashion.
They're in practice rounds.
And so he was like, maybe I can take a stand by delivering a 26-hour speech. I do think that it is, if you think that everything has gone off the rails and all hope is lost, just remember that the man that he unseated as the longest speech ever king was delivering that 24-hour, 25-hour, whatever he did, filibuster to stop the Civil Rights Act. Strom Thurmond's record was about him trying to filibuster civil rights. So keep that in mind if you're wondering first of all, how we ended up in this spot that we're in America.
Sure.
But also, if you're just wondering kind of whether things can ever get better or worse. They can get better.
Sure.
No one has put that kind of time into trying to stop civil rights from happening.
Sure.
In that way in the Senate since. People have come up with new ideas about how to stop civil rights from happening.
Right.
But that was the last time anyone tried to spend 24 hours talking about it.
That's right.
So things can always get better.
Yep.
They can get worse too.
They can get worse.
You got to be vigilant. Yeah. Anyway, I'm excited that we have you all here because I've been meaning to ask Brent a question on this podcast.
Being put on the spot. I bragged that I could do it. And here we go.
Well, no. I have been getting asked all week what I think about the tariff business, obviously, because
Yeah.
that's the main news in the news.
Yeah.
And this is the first time that I can remember in a Trump administration or Trump adjacent time that I truly don't have any fucking clue what's going on. I actually don't understand what's happening right now.
Sure.
I don't, and not even listen, there's a lot of times that I don't understand why someone would want what the Trump administration wants, but I do understand why they do. I understand in the logic of MAGA world,
Yes.
why things are happening the way they're happening. They're trolling us, or they have heard some cockamamie conspiracy theory about a thing. There's a lot of reasons that, that Trump advocates for things.
Yes.
Most of them are actually pretty transparent once you believe that someone could believe these things.
Sure.
I don't have any idea what even the fake endgame of the tariffs is. I don't know what the real endgame of the tariffs is. I don't understand why this idea has been proposed in any fashion. I don't understand why Democrats are reacting the way they're I understand truly nothing about what's happening.
Sure.
And Brent came in here and was like, I want to talk about tariffs on the podcast. So I'm going to turn the mic over to him to tell us his thoughts about the tariffs. But first, explain to me, not to them. They probably know. What's happening?
Well, I don't know.
I mean, nobody knows.
After I told... Yeah. Right. I mean, I do think that there is I think when it comes to what his endgame is here, I do think that there is a certain level of desire to actually do a trade reset in a way that will help America. I think that's part of it. Mm-hmm. Not to give him too much credit.
Yeah.
I think part of it is that he is enjoying blowing up a system.
Yeah.
I think part of it is just retaliatory in ways that just sort of suit him. I mean, right. There's literally no reason to be...
his logic.
There's literally no reason to be doing tariffs on Canada. They're one of the countries that we're besties with. I think that we have a trade surplus with there's just we don't need to be doing tariffs with Canada, but I think he just sort of has decided that he doesn't like Canada. Right.
He is mad at Canada. No one knows why, but I can follow that he's mad at them.
Sure.
And I don't ask questions like why with him. So it's,
no. So I don't know that I have the answer in terms of what his specific end game is, but in so many instances, I don't think anybody ever really does.
That's so true.
So.
And also, no one seemed to think he would actually do this. Which I find interesting because this entire administration has been defined by people not believing he would do exactly what he said he's going to do.
Completely.
I mean, that's why Democrats have had no plan for dealing with literally any of the things that he very explicitly told us he would do.
That's exactly right. And that is actually, when I told you that I wanted to talk about tariffs.
Right. That's what you really want to talk about.
Yes, it is. And we can talk more sort of about, because I was sort of in the same place as you where I was I don't know anything about tariffs, and I still I'm still only scratching the surface, but I was I can't not know anything about the tariffs. And what I sort of have learned is that the other thing that I think may be a short-term endgame of his is to put the Democrats in a weird place. And he's good at doing this, I think sometimes accidentally and sometimes purposefully. Yeah. But what's interesting about tariffs is that every party does them, and Democrats have been pushing for them forever. You don't have to dig hard to find Bernie Sanders talking about doing tariffs. You don't have to dig that hard to talk about Nancy Pelosi wanting to do tariffs. Yeah. Joe Biden did tariffs. Right. With some success, actually. And you know me, I'm not a Joe Biden defender here, right? But I think, and this sort of goes back to last week when we were what are we going to do on this podcast? We're sort of going to be talking about what we think Democrats could be doing better, and we're going to be talking about how they could be messaging things. And I think as in the fallout of the tariffs as they were announced on, I guess it was Wednesday, and the stock market crashed, I think a lot of Democrats have found themselves trying to prop up the system that we have been in, which obviously wasn't working for American workers. It's why better parts of the country are complete shit right now, basically, right? And also siding with whatever it is that will help the stock market do better as opposed to help American workers. And listen, what Trump did is crazy, and we can talk about the 1,700 different reasons that it's crazy. But the Democrats' response needs to be more nuanced than tariffs bad, stock market good.
Right.
And that's all we're getting right now. And like that, I think, is delusional. I don't think that's going to speak to workers. I mean, the one group of people who have been very much in favor of these tariffs have been unions. Sean Fain from the UAW, who a lot of people have been trying to convince to run for president as a Democrat in 2028, who spoke at the DNC on behalf of Kamala Harris. Nobody's more excited about these tariffs than Sean Fain.
Right.
So, like, this idea that, like, we're going to throw our... And the other people who seem to be, like, very mad at them, besides normie Democrats, are Republicans. There's Republican groups that are, like, suing Donald Trump right now. There's Republican groups that are, like... Well, Republican senators are trying to, like... win back control over setting tariffs in Congress right now because they're mad at Trump for doing this. I just, like, we have to have a better message than, like, let's just do what we've been doing for 40 years because the stock market was good.
Well, this goes back to, like, a lot of what our criticism has been broadly, which is that instead because everything's reactive, there is no... Democrats have not sold us a plan of what they would do to protect American workers that can contrast the tariff plan. And so instead, they're kind of like, oh, no, just don't do tariffs.
Right.
But, like, they're not... The thing that made everyone... I won't say excited because no one understood what they were. So the thing
Sure.
that made people who weren't paying attention seem excited about tariffs based on what they heard from Donald Trump about them was that they thought it would bring manufacturing back to the U.S.
Right. Well, and they also, like, were so delusional because Trump was making it seem like the foreign countries paid to, like,
Right.
nobody understood what the tariffs
No one understood
were.
what they were. Exactly. But the anxiety that was undergirding a lot of it was people having anxiety about their own economic prospects in America. It was
Yes.
about people wanting to bring jobs to America and
Totally.
believing delusionally that this kind of insane economic policy would accomplish that because they'd been told it had.
Right.
But the reason that they believed that is because no one explained anything else to them about how this might work.
Right.
Like that, the Democrats have been just rocking around being like, no, tariffs are bad.
Right.
Instead of being like, here's what would actually bring jobs back to the U.S.
Yes.
This is not it, but here's what would. Our plan is this.
Right. Or in addition to the tariffs, here are the other suite of things that Democrats very much stand for that would be good. Because what I would be saying right now is, okay, you want to bring manufacturing back to the country. Well, let's make sure those are good union jobs that pay well, that allow people to work at a factory and live fulfilling lives that, like, they were when they were working in factories in the 1970s and 1980s, right? You could be saying that. You could be saying also, okay, well, another thing that we need to do is, because there will be some inflation in the near term, is we need to go after price gouging.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these companies are going to have a 10% tariff based on their, or put on their product, and then they're going to charge consumers 50% more.
Right.
Right? Because these companies will try and fuck us. So, like, also be pushing for that. You could be pushing for tax incentives for consumers to buy American-made products. This is one thing, again, Joe Biden did with his tariffs that were, like, actually good, was, like, you know, he put a bunch of tariffs on, like green things coming from other countries. So, like, EV batteries, solar panels. And so not only did he put the tariffs on them, but then he also, like, incentivized American companies to make those here. Like, I think I read something the other day that, like, Joe Biden, more manufacturing plants were broke ground during the Biden administration than had in the previous 30 years. That's, like, an actual good thing that Joe Biden did. And the reason that they did that is because Joe Biden, like, gave them a bunch of tax incentives to, like, go build factories to, like, make these things.
Which is, like, a perfect example also of how they could have owned the issue of tariffs and not let it become a destructive issue.
And then they also gave consumers tax incentive. Like, that's why there's now a $7,500 tax incentive for you to buy an American-made EV, right? So, like, that all, and it hadn't started to work yet because it takes some time, which is why I think people are like...
But they also never explained to us how it would work or why it would work, because they didn't think that they didn't think they needed to message against a simple idea. But the thing is that Trump's idea sounded simpler.
It sounded simple.
And that's because it wasn't true and it was based in lies.
Right.
But also, that helps explain the difference between tariffing everything and tariffing on a sort of selective basis.
Well, totally.
Which is what's actually going to fuck everyone over. Is the fact that we're tariffing literally everything at once, which means that things that we have no hope of ever making in the U.S. are also going to be subject to tariffs. You need sneakers. Everyone in America needs sneakers. We don't make enough sneakers in America, and we're not going to put on everyone's feet.
Right.
They're not because of that, the price of sneakers is going to go way up. And like that's a basic thing that every single person in America needs is a pair of shoes. And that we have no way of addressing that in a way that like saves American jobs, because even if you decided to produce sneakers in America, all the materials you would use to produce the sneakers would be coming from abroad. And so we've just made it impossible to make affordable sneakers anywhere or sell affordable sneakers anywhere.
Yeah, I think Apple has like essentially said like that they cannot make the iPhone in the United States. Like that, just like do not have like any, like there's not a world where that would happen. And like I would contend like maybe that's a problem, you know? I mean, like,
but that's a problem that has a different solution than the random tariff that has no, you know,
100%.
Selective tariffs are done to develop industries in countries, and that's how Joe Biden was using them, and that's how people are using them in places.
Right, and that's how you could specifically bring back jobs to industries
in certain sectors
that are the ones that have been hollowed out.
Right. And are sectors that are actually like conceivably things you could produce in America.
Correct.
Because like as Brent was pointing, we can't grow all of the tropical fruit.
Right, I was going to say there's like a, you know, all of anything tropical right now has a tariff on it.
Right.
Like, we don't grow coffee here.
Exactly. Like we're never going to have enough coffee produced domestically because we're never going to have any.
Yeah.
That we could that a coffee tariff makes any sense.
Right. And the other thing that I think Democrats could very easily be messaging on, because Trump already has sort of a reputation of being chaotic for good reason, obviously. But like the other reason that a tariff plan will not work is chaos.
Yeah.
Because you as a company that manufactures something, you have to have some sort of knowledge of what's... So like one of the things that happened recently was Stellantis, who makes Jeep and Chrysler and some other cars, they have plants in America, but they also have plants in Mexico and they have plants in Canada. They almost immediately laid off like 900 workers. And Sean Fain of UAW was like, you have capacity that you could be doing that in America. And I believe him, and I'm sure he's right about that. But like... I can't believe I'm gonna defend Stellantis for laying 900 people off.
But like,
but the reason that they probably felt the need to do that is because why would you hire a bunch more workers to do that in the U.S. because that's obviously more expensive when over the span of the last 3 months, listener, think to yourself, how many times have you heard since Donald Trump took office about whether we are or are not going to have tariffs on Canada and Mexico? Probably 300 times, and it changes from hour to hour. So like, why would you hire a bunch of American workers at a higher expense to build those in America because of tariffs when tomorrow there might not be tariffs on Mexico?
Yeah.
It changes every single second. And so like, there's no way to... When there's instability that way, there's no way to plan. Why would you build a plant? Why would you start break ground on $1 billion plant to build something here when tomorrow you might be able to redo it, in Vietnam for $0?
Well, and this is actually something that someone like Liz Warren would be very well positioned to explain to us. Like there are messengers inside the Democratic Party that should be able to explain this to us, but they need to pair it with a message about what they would do differently.
Yeah.
And it can't just be we wouldn't do tariffs.
Right.
Because the thing that was undergirding all of this was anxiety about the economic situation here. They had already during the election misunderstood that the economy doing well was not the same as the stock market doing well, that people felt that the economy was not doing well because everything was getting more expensive and their wages weren't going up as the economy.
Right. This is one of the main reasons why workers feel like Democrats are delusional.
Yes. Well, because they are.
Because they came into their small town that didn't have any jobs and told them how great the economy was because the stock market was good.
No, exactly. I feel like that experience was so central to why so many people believed the tariffs thing without really looking into what it meant or what it was because they were fucking desperate.
Yes.
And Democrats made it sound like, oh, don't worry, everything is going fine now. And the thing is, maybe Democrats could have said everything will be going fine because we have done these things. Now, I would say part of governance is making sure that the things that you put into action actually go into action.
Yes.
You know, we've heard some critics recently talking about, like, part of the issue that Democrats have is that they put these very slow-moving processes into place,
Sure.
and then it's like no one feels them, and it's like, well, if a tree falls, you know,
Yes,
and then
right.
then Republicans get credit for the good economy that the Democrats caused because they have finally 4 years later people are feeling the effects, whereas like you need to find ways to get people to feel the effects of these programs right away.
Yeah.
But also, if you don't believe as, you know, a party that having no sort of, like, people having no sort of sense of financial security and having no hope for the financial future is a problem, because you are too delusional to see that people aren't happy with the way they're living, then of course no one is going to vote for you, even if the opponent's a lunatic. He certainly is putting stuff into action.
And that was why so many people were just sort of like, we as Democrats, like, have to show that we understand that people are feeling pain. People wondered why there were crossover voters between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump.
That's this.
It's this issue.
Yes.
It's
economic
this one.
anxiety.
Yes.
It's
and
literally
over
that.
trade.
Yeah.
This is why, you know, like, what we're talking about right now is all Bernie's 2016 campaign about NAFTA.
Yeah.
Right?
No, totally. And I also think that maybe part of what has happened here is that, so, like, there are some things now that are difficult to disentangle in a tariff situation because we have a very globalized economy. That didn't used to be how it was.
Right.
It used to be that you didn't rely so much on raw materials from other places. It used to be that things that were produced in the U.S. were made of materials that were produced in the U.S. That there was just like a lot less interdependence in the world. And the rise of that is not necessarily a good or bad thing as long as you understand the consequences of it and what it means for economies of different sort of levels. So, like, you know, the U.S. economy, because it's a strong economy, does not have, you know, the ability to produce raw materials really cheaply a lot of the time because we have to pay our workers more. Whereas there are countries that they pay their workers a lot less, in part because the cost of living is less. And, you know, you have to understand the consequences of it. But you can't live in a world where you, like, don't understand that exists. And I think explaining that and what a smarter trade policy would be that addresses these issues while still acknowledging that we live in a different economy than we did in 1945 was the job of Democrats. And was something that I think Bernie Sanders had made a lot of progress towards doing, because when he was talking about tariffs, he was not talking about mass tariffs. He was talking about targeted tariffs. He was using the word tariffs to talk about what Joe Biden did, essentially. And the fact, and that was an issue that the left really owned because it was a manufacturing issue. It was an issue about protecting union jobs. And the idea that they let themselves get walked all over this way by, and are now reverting to a sort of a framing of the economy that frames it as if there is nothing you can do about the globalization of the economy. So, like, now their position is just like, we can't do anything to address these imbalances. These imbalances are real. America does lose manufacturing jobs because it's cheaper to produce stuff in other places.
Course.
There are people live in communities that have been decimated by the loss of manufacturing. To pretend like there's nothing we can do about that, instead of laying out a plan for what we could do for those people, even if it includes paying to retrain them to do something else or, you know, pivoting in some way. To not have a plan for them that you're willing to articulate because your new position in opposition to this lunacy policy is just to be like, well, we can't do anything about this. It's like either tariffs or no tariffs. And is crazy, but the reason they're in this position is because they didn't bother to articulate a position to begin with.
Exactly. And you can't, you know, what's his name? It's Chris DeLuzio, who is from, I believe, Western Pennsylvania. He's a Democratic representative, you know, represents a part of the country who has, you know, that's like notable Rust Belt country right there, right? And he has come out sort of in the last few days with a little bit more of a nuanced take on this, and sort of has been, I think, testing out like a level of like Democratic populism that, like, you know, I think he's still maybe finding the words for, which is fine. I think we should allow for that. But every single normie Democrat on the internet has called for his immediate ousting.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody wants Connor Lamb to primary him or whatever they want. You know, I mean, it's just like...
Their new
and
BFF,
it's like,
Connor
you know,
Lamb.
I mean, it's just like, what if, as a thought experiment, we heard him out for a second?
Yeah.
like,
Like-
might he know something?
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, so that's really sort of like the tariff conversation that I feel like I wanted to happen. Like, it was just like,
Well, as usual, part of what's happened here is a Democratic messaging failure.
yes, exactly.
I mean, like,
that's, yes.
a sort of Looney Tune chaos policy has been met with a massive failure on the part of the Democrats to do anything to address this Looney Tunes-ness. And so
Right.
now we're in a world where our only choices are never fixing anything or doing the most insane possible thing.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, like, they're just whining because they're like, well, we said prices would go up when no one
Right,
believed
exactly.
us. And it's
oh,
like,
I've been seeing a lot of Kamala said we'd be in a recession by the summer. I don't care what she said.
No.
As it turns out.
no. Well, she didn't say anything that convinced anyone that she knew how better to avoid one.
Right?
That was what we needed to say.
Right. Well, and I think that a lot of people who voted for Trump and a lot of people actually even sort of like on the left would contend, and this is what I think like maybe is partly what Trump is doing, but again, who
could say?
fully knows, but I think that like, you know, I think there are people on the left who are okay with the stock market tanking if it does mean bringing more American jobs back.
Yeah.
And like, I think that we should not demand that those people be primaried.
I think that one thing that we need to be doing right now, though, is acknowledging that the short-term pain this all imposes is actually not acceptable in this moment, which is another thing that they're not doing.
100%, which is why you need to do the slate of other policies,
Yes.
whether it be price gouging or whether it be,
You need
know,
to do more
other
than the
tech-
price gouging thing because
Yes,
you need
no,
to stop the
definitely
inflation
do.
before it starts.
100%.
That, I think, the biggest kind of like frustration that Americans have right now is inflation. To have done a policy
Totally.
that's going to explode it
for
is
sure.
crazy. To
And he's
not be
going to have-
messaging against that in a smart way where you are
Oh, yeah.
actually saying what we can do to stop this.
Oh, yeah, and they should be
is-
going after the inflation that this has
Yes.
caused. Like, I'm not saying that, like, everybody should just shut up and take it until the jobs come back.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
Because that's,
but-
I think that part of what, I think part of where the left runs into a messaging issue with the center is that the left will often be like, well, you know, in the long run, this will do blah, blah,
Right.
blah.
And sorry, your life sucks.
Sorry, your life sucks.
Right.
And the center will be like, well, the stock market's doing fine, so everything's fine. And like,
Right.
no one in this equation is actually advocating for the American people at the moment. As people who
Yes.
like currently can't afford their lives, who are about to face even higher costs.
Right.
I think that this should have warranted some sort of emergency proposal that would stop the inflation before it happens.
Sure.
Instead of anyone on any part of the political spectrum suggesting that stopping it after it happens is enough. Just because I think,
Right.
you know, this is so badly designed that the economy is going to crash, whether it's for good reason or not. People are going to lose their jobs because of the chaos. All
Totally.
these things are going to happen.
People are going to be out, I think, thousands more dollars, like, in
Yes.
spending on
Right.
things.
And like what I wish that someone was thinking about instead of just wondering about the long-term consequences of it in this moment in particular, just because it's so scary in this moment right now, is like actually how to stop those things before they happen instead of just being sorry that they happen, which I think
Right.
no political party is currently thinking in those terms, at least messaging wise.
Right.
And when they do, it's always something insufficient where you're like, well, that won't work, or, you know, whatever it is.
Yes.
But like, I think even messaging along those lines, even messaging that like, you know, there are things that we could do so that the price of sneakers remains affordable as opposed to goes up and then we go after price gouging because then it still went up 10% or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
50%. Like, there are things that we can do right now to stop this, whatever those are. I'm not in government and I don't know what they are. I mean, what they are is not doing this in the first place. But like, then figure out a way to say that without saying it. Like,
Right.
I don't, you know. But I mean, I do think that the messaging needs to be more urgent about protecting the American people
Yes.
from the effects of this, as opposed to protecting the economy from the effects of this and protecting manufacturing jobs from the effects, like
protecting
these
the
like
stock market,
vague
because
and
that's
protecting
not
the stock
people's
market.
lives.
Exactly. Like, I think that has been where they went astray from the beginning.
Yes.
Which is Democrats didn't sound like they cared about your life. They were telling you the economy was good and you couldn't afford eggs. And then now they're telling you well, sorry, you voted for this, as you watch yourself be unable to afford sneakers and lose your job. Like, somebody needs to be sort of messaging around what they need to do to protect the American people.
Yes.
Which is, I know, not a real policy, but is the most important priority that they could kind of pull out of this that is not being discussed currently by anyone. That I think is missing on both the right and the left, if I'm being honest, and has always been missing in the center, obviously. But like, I think that is really where the votes lie. Yes. It's where the kind of political agency lies, and it's where you could find people to primary people built around that.
I agree.
That isn't necessarily a partisan, sort of camp.
Yeah.
But is more sort of like, I mean, that's, I think, the sort of Dan Osborne's of the world.
Yes. I think he's running again.
I'm sure he should.
Yeah, he's going to run against whoever.
Listen, he's a guy who I don't approve of a lot of what he agrees, what he says.
Sure.
But he was somebody who very much was running on, I'm running on a platform of doing what I need to do to protect the people in my state.
Right.
Not to protect all of these interests from each other, which is kind of what everyone else is talking about.
Right.
And I think that messaging has been missing from this entire conversation.
Yes.
Because it's like,
what
does manufacturing jobs mean? Especially if you don't live in a manufacturing state.
Sure.
Then it's like, well, we're just going to have a recession for nothing? And I can't afford shoes?
Well, and this is the other thing.
I'm very hung up on the shoes thing because I need new shoes and I'm very nervous about it.
Well, and this is the other thing that I think Democrats should remember. Because yes, the Rust Belt has been very hollowed out by this. But, you just sort of like mentioned the states that this affected.
Yeah.
It's every state.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think like literally every state has a factory or has had factories or used to have factories or produce something or have, farmers that are producing some sort of good that are, I mean, it's like, and now there's going to be retaliatory tariffs, right? So like it's going to be harder for them to like ship their goods in different places. So
and especially
like,
for U.S. agriculture, that is going to be a fucking mess, and they're already in them.
Right. It's not just like, so I that's the other thing I want to urge you, the listener, or just like Democrats at large to remember, and this sort of like goes to what we were talking about last week to a certain degree too, like this affects you whether you live in Western Pennsylvania or not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I just think, and I'm not talking about the tariffs. I'm talking about like the industrial policy of the last 40 years. So like, I mean, I remember growing up in Keokuk, and half of that town worked at the local factory, and they were all people who owned homes and had their, kids in good public schools. Like that factory is long closed, but and nobody thinks of Iowa as
every downtown in every small town in America,
right?
Yeah.
That's when so it's like you have to. I think a lot of Democrats sort of like think about like the places that have been, quote unquote, like hollowed out by, some of these trade policies over the last few, and it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. It's upstate New York for sure.
Sure.
That's every town in upstate New York.
Yeah.
No, and also that maybe those manufacturing, you often hear from Democrats like, well, those jobs aren't coming back. So, whatever, we've got to pivot. Fine. You have to have a plan for people to pivot to, though.
Exactly, right.
Because actually, like, people can't afford to go without work for 6 years while the economy pivots. Right. They need something to do to pay their rent today or to protect their rent today or whatever it is. I mean, pay them money for nothing if you want, but like the lack of urgency in how both Democrats and often Republicans have addressed these issues. And I think the one thing that Trump got everyone on was that he was going to do it urgently.
Going to do something.
He's going to do something urgently.
That's right.
Is it a plan that's going to make everything even worse? Sure.
Right.
But if you're wondering why people are willing to overlook that, it's because they were looking for something because everything sucks now.
Everything sucks now. Well, and that's why, yes, and that, again, to hammer it home, but just to sort of like put it in a different way, what we can't advocate right now, and Democrats always want to do this, and they won't necessarily say these words necessarily, but like it is Democrats' first instinct to advocate for some version of the status quo.
Yes.
And in the year of our Lord 2025, in Donald Trump's America, when we've seen what we have seen, right? We have lived through what we have lived through. We're living through what these tariffs are going to cause right now. What you advocate for can't be whatever we were doing under the Biden administration.
That's so true.
And that is going to be what they are all going to want to do. They're going to want to book a slot on Morning Joe, and they're going to try and remind everybody how great things used to be.
Yeah.
And they're going to remind everyone how great things would be if Kamala Harris was the president right now.
Yeah.
And they're going to do a lot of that. And like, that's not it.
No.
Don't do that.
Well, and also there's a way to split the difference there, because you can say that here is a more responsible trade policy, and here's what Joe Biden did that was more responsible than that. You know, we just did that. And you can also say there were things that we could not do or that we did not do that we would still want to do. And here's what a vision of what we would do wholly actually looks like.
Yeah.
You know, they don't seem to like because they don't have ideas anymore.
Right.
They can only defend what they've already done,
Right.
but they can't offer you what they would do.
Right? Like, why don't they have an in-depth industrial policy?
Right.
And if they do, why don't I know what it is?
Well, and if they do also, why has no one had the words to explain it in simple terms to us?
That's right.
Because that's what I think people, you know, we've talked about this before on the podcast, but that is what people miss in complaining about populist messaging, is populist messaging tells you the goal. It doesn't tell you how you're going to get there. So, you know, a lot of sort of centrist Democrats get very mad because they're like, well, what's the plan?
Right. Show me the white paper.
Show me the white paper, as if they're reading white papers and understand how government policy works.
Right.
But you can't just show the plan. If you don't have a goal, there's no reason to have a plan. Right. Too often Democrats have had a white paper and not had a goal.
Right.
And I think in this moment right now, because Donald Trump is an economic populist in his own way, I wouldn't say that the policy is popular, but it's a populist framing of policy because it certainly doesn't have a plan. It only has a goal. And why it is that he's
As we've seen.
Right. And why it is that he's able to institute the end goal without the plan is a mystery to all of us, when you guys couldn't even institute the plan. But you have to have both of those be part of your industrial policy.
Yeah.
And also you have to remember that industrial policy affects other things about people's lives. So industrial policy does not just exist in a vacuum. It has all sorts of ancillary impacts on, you know, on secondary economies. It has impacts on how people, you know, relate around the country. It has impacts on how, you know, the haircutting business is going. Like, there's plenty of ways in which this is secondary impacts. And so oftentimes they will also talk about jobs in manufacturing areas as if that is like a separate problem from other problems and is unrelated to like healthcare and education and all these other things. But like, all of these things are connected to each other. And part of having simple messaging around them is also drawing on some of those connections. So it's just like one of the silliest messaging failures of all times, because tariffs was an issue owned by the far left.
Yes.
And the fact that the center had abandoned them so dramatically that they couldn't explain why his plan was different than the far left's plan is really embarrassing for everyone.
And this also goes back to one of my points last week as to why it is that Democrats right now don't seem to know how to react. And it's because they've spent the last 30 some odd years trying to convince you all why Bernie Sanders' idea was so bad.
Right. Yeah.
And so now that Trump has done a version of Bernie Sanders' idea,
they're
granted,
just like, well, this is
much more chaotic, I would contend, probably.
Well, he's doing the version that they were claiming Bernie Sanders was advocating when he was advocating for a sensible version of it.
Right. Now it's just sort of like, oh, well, shit.
Right. We're just against it all. We're against everything.
You're right.
Well, they're against having goals.
Well, right.
That's the problem, the real problem.
Yeah.
And why are they against having goals? Because they don't care about your votes. They only care about their donors. And why do they only care about their donors? Because for too long, their donors have been giving them the money to buy your votes.
Yeah.
Stop letting that system work. Vote for somebody who does not have those donors.
Right.
You actually, the votes still are more important than the donors.
They
don't want you to think that, but they actually are. So you have power over this if you're thoughtful about it.
Right.
Anyway, that's the news. It's not really the news.
No,
That's our thoughts on
We're not doing the news
We're not doing the news anymore. So
I mean, that was sort of the news.
I was more newsy than we usually have been in our general
in our two
podcasts that we've done, according to our new methodology.
True. Yeah, we spoke about 3 current events.
That's right. Only one of which is national political news at the moment, but it's also turn off the news as our final piece of advice.
Right, exactly.
Just nothing is going to work out the way you think it's going to work out. It's all a mess.
Right.
Don't call me to talk you off the ledge right now. Too many people doing that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, just try to be calm. Be a little zen.
Lila Nordstrom, known for
her calm zen-like attitude.
That's right. Well, we'll end on that.
Okay. We'll talk to you next week. Bye.